The morning light filtered through the massive glass dome of Station Omega-7 as Marcus Webb stepped off the transport shuttle. Around him, dozens of other beings moved through the docking bay with purpose and confidence. He watched a group of tall blue-skinned creatures with 4 arms discussing battle tactics in their clicking language. Near the entrance, massive bear-like aliens with thick gray fur carried equipment that would have required a forklift back on Earth. Marcus adjusted his simple military pack and followed the crowd toward the academy entrance. Drill Sergeant Krex stood at the front of the assembly hall like a living mountain. His green scales caught the artificial light as his yellow eyes swept across the gathered cadets. Marcus had never seen anything like him. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with arms thick as tree trunks and claws that could probably punch through steel. When Krex spoke, his voice rumbled through the hall like distant thunder. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," Krex began. His words translated instantly through the universal communicators each cadet wore. "You represent 27 worlds and think you are the finest warriors your species can produce. Most of you are wrong." Marcus looked around at his fellow cadets. The insect-like Thraxians stood in perfect formation, their chitinous armor gleaming. The quick-moving Zanari seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. The massive Garathians looked like they could tear apart the building with their bare hands. Among all these impressive beings, Marcus felt remarkably ordinary. "The Crucible will test everything you think you know about warfare," Krex continued. 72 hours of continuous challenges designed to break the weak and forge the strong. Physical endurance, tactical thinking, survival skills, and mental toughness. Only those who complete every section will earn the right to call themselves galactic soldiers. The drill sergeant activated a holographic display showing a massive complex stretching across several kilometers. Mountains, deserts, Arctic zones, and urban environments all contained within the training facility. Marcus studied the layout, noting the different sections and trying to understand the flow from one challenge to the next. "The record time is 17 hours, set by Cadet Zix of the Zanari 3 years ago," Krex announced. "Most of you will take the full 72 hours. Some of you will not finish at all. The course begins at dawn tomorrow. Use tonight to prepare yourselves." As the cadets dispersed to their quarters, Marcus overheard conversations in dozens of languages. The Thraxians discussed formation tactics learned over thousands of years of warfare. The Garathians compared strength training methods from their high-gravity homeworld. The Zanari talked about speed techniques passed down through generations. Of their species, Marcus had no ancient warrior traditions to draw upon. Humans had been part of the galactic community for less than a century. Most species barely knew Earth existed, and those who did considered it a primitive backwater planet. The few humans who had attempted galactic military training before had performed adequately, but nothing more. That evening, Marcus sat in his small quarters studying the course materials. The challenges seemed designed for specific alien abilities. Environmental suits for species that could not survive in certain atmospheres. Gravity adjusters for beings from different worlds. Specialized weapons for creatures with varying numbers of limbs and different sensory capabilities. Everything about. The Academy assumed cadets would rely on their species' natural advantages and traditional methods. The course seemed to test how well each being could apply their inherited strengths to military situations. Marcus realized he had no particular physical advantages. Humans were not the strongest, fastest, or most durable species represented. Here, the next morning arrived with the sound of a deep horn echoing across the academy. 63 cadets assembled at the starting line as the artificial sun began to rise over the training complex. Krex stood at a control panel surrounded by monitoring screens that would track every cadet's progress through the course. "The first section is environmental adaptation," Krex announced. "Navigate through 3 different climate zones, each more hostile than the last. Survival gear is available at designated stations, but supplies are limited. Choose wisely." The starting gate opened and the cadets rushed forward. Marcus watched as different species immediately separated into groups based on their natural abilities. The cold weather specialists headed toward the Arctic section. those adapted to desert conditions aimed for the hot zones. The aquatic species dove toward the underwater passages. Marcus followed the main group but quickly noticed something others seemed to miss. The designated supply stations were positioned in specific locations not just for convenience, but to create bottlenecks where cadets would compete for limited resources. The course designers wanted to see how different species would handle resource competition under pressure. Instead of rushing toward the popular supply stations, Marcus took a longer route toward a smaller cache that most cadets had ignored. While others fought over advanced environmental suits, he found basic equipment that would work adequately in all three zones instead of excelling in just one. The Arctic section tested how cadets handled extreme cold and limited visibility. Most species relied on their environmental suits and pushed through with determination. Marcus noticed that the artificial blizzard followed predictable patterns. By timing his movement with the wind cycles, he could use the storm itself as cover and move more efficiently than those fighting against it. In the desert zone, cadets struggled with heat exhaustion and dehydration. Marcus observed that the water stations were placed near underground cooling systems that created small temperature differences in the sand. By following these subtle signs, he found a path that kept him near shade and cooler ground, while others struggled across the burning surface. The underwater section challenged breathing capabilities and navigation skills. While aquatic species swam confidently through the murky water, others relied heavily on breathing apparatus and underwater vehicles. Marcus noticed that the artificial current patterns could be used to assist movement rather than hinder it. By reading the water flow, he found routes that carried him efficiently toward the exit, while others worked against the current. As he completed the first section, Marcus realized something important about the course design. Each challenge was created to test specific abilities, but there were always alternative approaches that relied on observation and adaptation rather than pure physical capability. The course was designed to be conquered by superior attributes, but it could also be solved by superior thinking. By the time Marcus reached the second section, he was ahead of most cadets despite starting in the middle of the pack. The tactical puzzle zone stretched before him like a miniature city filled with obstacles, defensive positions, and simulated enemy targets. Other cadets were already setting up complex equipment and consulting their species' traditional military strategies. The first puzzle required cadets to cross a wide ravine while under simulated enemy fire. Marcus watched as the Thraxians attempted to build an armored bridge using their natural engineering instincts. The Zanari tried to find high-speed crossing points that would minimize exposure time. The Garathians simply looked for ways to leap across using their massive strength. Marcus studied the ravine from different angles while automatic laser systems simulated hostile fire from the opposite cliff. The crossing points were obvious and heavily defended. The building materials for bridges were limited and would take hours to assemble properly. But as he examined the cliff face, he noticed something the others had missed. Stress fractures ran through the rock wall in a specific pattern. The artificial environment had been constructed to withstand normal use, but these weakened areas could be exploited. Marcus found a position where the laser defense systems had a blind spot and used his standard equipment to trigger a small controlled rock slide. The falling stones created a rough but functional pathway down one side of the ravine and partway up the other. While other cadets spent valuable time and resources building elaborate solutions, Marcus crossed the ravine in minutes using the terrain itself as his tool. The monitoring systems registered his completion of the first tactical puzzle before some cadets had even finished setting up their equipment. The second puzzle involved neutralizing a series of automated defense turrets while protecting a simulated civilian population. Standard military doctrine called for careful coordination, suppressing fire, and systematic advancement. Marcus watched several teams of cadets execute textbook maneuvers that would eventually succeed but required extensive time and coordination. Instead of approaching the turrets directly, Marcus studied their programming patterns. The automated systems were designed to respond to specific threats in predictable ways. By using reflective surfaces and sound generators from his basic equipment, he created false targets that drew the turret's attention away from the civilian areas. While the defense systems fired at decoys, Marcus simply walked through their blind spots and manually disabled each turret from behind. The third tactical puzzle required extracting intelligence from a heavily fortified position without triggering an alarm system. Other cadets prepared for elaborate infiltration missions using species-specific abilities. The Zanari planned high-speed entries that would complete the mission before alarms could be fully activated. The insectoid species considered tunneling approaches that would bypass surface defenses entirely. Marcus noticed that the alarm system was designed to detect unauthorized entry, but not authorized exit. The facility had regular automated supply deliveries that the security system ignored completely. By timing his approach with a scheduled delivery and using camouflage techniques, he entered the facility inside a supply container. Once inside, he accessed the intelligence files during a routine maintenance cycle when security protocols were temporarily relaxed. Drill. Sergeant Krex watched the monitoring screens with growing confusion. The human cadet was completing sections faster than anyone in Academy history, but not through superior physical abilities or advanced technology. His solutions were completely unconventional, often ignoring the intended challenges entirely in favor of approaches that seemed almost too simple to work. "Sir, should we investigate possible cheating?" asked one of the monitoring technicians. A nervous-looking alien with multiple eyes that could track different screens simultaneously, Krex studied the detailed sensor readings. Every piece of equipment Marcus used was standard issue. His movements were tracked continuously by multiple independent systems. There was no evidence of unauthorized assistance or technology. The human was simply solving problems in ways that no one had anticipated. The radiation survival section was designed to test endurance and resistance to hostile environments. Cadets were required to spend 12 hours in a zone with dangerous but non-lethal radiation levels while completing basic maintenance tasks. Most species relied on their protective suits and simply endured the exposure while working as quickly as possible. Marcus approached the radiation zone differently. Instead of just enduring the hazardous environment, he studied the radiation sources and patterns. The artificial radiation was generated by specific emitters designed to create realistic training conditions. By using metallic debris scattered throughout the area, Marcus constructed a shelter that not only protected him from radiation but actually channeled the energy into useful applications. He used the radiation-powered devices to complete maintenance tasks more efficiently than cadets working with standard equipment in protective gear. While others counted down the hours until they could safely leave the zone, Marcus turned the hostile environment into a resource that made him more effective. The monitoring station buzzed with activity as Academy officials tried to understand what they were witnessing. The human cadet was not just surviving the challenges designed to test galactic warriors. He was redefining what it meant to complete them successfully. By hour 6, Marcus had completed sections that typically took entire days. His solutions were recorded and analyzed by confused instructors who could find no flaws in his methods, only approaches they had never considered. The course designers had created challenges based on thousands of years of military experience from dozens of species, but they had never encountered a species that approached problems the way humans did. Other cadets were beginning to notice the human's progress. Some tried to copy his methods, but without understanding the thinking behind his solutions, they only wasted time attempting to replicate techniques that required insight rather than imitation. The Thraxians could trigger rock slides, but they could not see the stress patterns that made the technique effective. The Zanari could move quickly through radiation zones, but they could not improvise the energy channeling systems that made the environment useful rather than merely survivable. Marcus continued through the course, unaware that his performance was causing a crisis in the Academy's understanding of military training and alien capabilities. The final obstacle course stretched before Marcus like a nightmare designed by committee. Every known form of military challenge was represented in a sprawling complex that twisted through multiple environments and conditions, underwater sections, led into zero-gravity chambers that connected to desert survival areas that opened into Arctic combat zones. It was a masterpiece of military engineering designed to test every possible skill a galactic soldier might need. Marcus stood at the entrance while other cadets were still struggling through earlier sections of the course. The monitoring screens showed his current position and time, but the numbers seemed impossible. 6 hours and 15 minutes into a 72-hour course, and he was approaching the final challenge that typically took 8 hours to complete even for experienced soldiers. The first section of the obstacle course required navigation through a zero-gravity environment while avoiding automated defense systems. Standard protocol involved careful movement using magnetic handholds and thruster packs to maintain control in weightless conditions. The defense systems were programmed to track movement patterns and react accordingly. Marcus studied the chamber before entering. The artificial gravity generators created the weightless zone, but they also created predictable air current patterns as the environmental systems worked to maintain atmospheric balance. Instead of fighting against the zero-gravity conditions, he used the air currents like an invisible transportation system. By releasing small objects to test the airflow and observing how the currents moved debris through the chamber, Marcus mapped the invisible rivers of moving air. He positioned himself to be carried by these currents, using minimal energy to guide his movement while the environment itself provided the propulsion. The defense systems were programmed to track powered movement, but they largely ignored objects that appeared to be drifting naturally with the airflow. The underwater section required cadets to navigate through murky water while avoiding obstacles and completing tasks with limited air supply. Most species relied on their breathing apparatus and underwater mobility gear to power through the challenges as quickly as possible. Marcus noticed that the underwater obstacles were positioned to create specific water flow patterns. The artificial current was not random but designed to simulate realistic underwater conditions that soldiers might encounter. By reading the water movement and understanding how the obstacles affected flow, he found routes where the current actually assisted his movement toward each objective. Instead of working against the water resistance, he used the flow patterns to reduce his energy expenditure and extend his air supply. While other cadets fought through the water with determination and strength, Marcus moved through it like he was part of the current itself. The temperature variation sections tested how cadets handled rapid changes from freezing cold to burning heat while maintaining combat effectiveness. The standard approach involved using environmental suits with heating and cooling systems to maintain stable body temperature while moving through the different zones. Marcus observed that the temperature changes followed specific patterns related to the artificial climate control systems. By timing his movement with the heating and cooling cycles, he found zones where the temperature was transitioning and therefore more moderate. He used thermal differences to create air currents that aided his movement and found ways to let the environmental systems work for him rather than against him. The combat simulation sections required cadets to engage multiple automated opponents while protecting civilian targets and achieving tactical objectives. The simulated enemies used advanced AI programming that adapted to different fighting styles and weapon systems. Traditional military training emphasized overwhelming firepower, tactical positioning, and coordinated attacks. Marcus approached the combat simulations like puzzles to be solved rather than battles to be won. He studied the AI behavior patterns and found ways to turn the automated systems against each other. By manipulating their programming triggers and creating false target priorities, he caused the simulated enemies to waste resources and create openings that allowed him to achieve objectives with minimal direct confrontation. The monitoring station had become a center of intense activity. Academy officials crowded around the screens showing Marcus's progress through sections that should have been impossible to complete so quickly. Emergency diagnostic programs ran continuously, searching for equipment malfunctions or system errors that could explain the unprecedented performance. "All systems are functioning normally," reported the chief technician, his tentacled fingers dancing across multiple control interfaces simultaneously. The human is using only standard equipment and following all safety protocols. There are no violations of course rules or academy regulations. Drill Sergeant Krex stood silently watching the main display screen. His yellow eyes tracked every movement as Marcus progressed through challenges that had been refined over decades to test the absolute limits of galactic military capabilities. The course was designed to be conquered by superior strength, advanced technology, specialized training, or species-specific advantages. It was not designed to be solved, yet that was exactly what the human appeared to be doing. Instead of overcoming each challenge through force or endurance, Marcus was finding ways to make the challenges work for him. He was not just completing the course, he was having a conversation with it, understanding its purpose, and responding with solutions that seemed to transcend the original design. The artificial intelligence systems that controlled various sections of the course were reporting anomalies. The human's approach was causing them to function in ways their programmers had never anticipated. Defense systems were being neutralized without being destroyed. Environmental hazards were being converted into useful resources. Combat scenarios were being resolved without traditional combat taking place. As Marcus approached the final checkpoint of the obstacle course, the Academy's senior staff gathered in the monitoring station. Word had spread throughout the facility that something unprecedented was happening. Instructors from different departments watched in fascination and confusion as fundamental assumptions about military training were being challenged by a single cadet from a species most of them barely knew existed. The timer display showed 55 minutes and 30 seconds. When Marcus entered the last section of the course, the final challenge was designed to combine every previous element into one overwhelming test that required cadets to demonstrate mastery of all skills simultaneously. While under extreme time pressure and resource limitations, Marcus paused at the entrance and surveyed the complex final section. For the first time since beginning the course, he smiled. This was not a challenge to be overcome. This was a conversation to be completed, and he finally understood what it was trying to say. The timer read 57 minutes and 43 seconds when Marcus crossed the final checkpoint. The monitoring station fell into complete silence as every being present stared at the impossible numbers on the display. 57 minutes. For a course designed to take 72 hours. Less than 1 hour for challenges that typically broke experienced soldiers and left even the strongest cadets exhausted and defeated. Drill Sergeant Krex stood frozen at his command console, his massive clawed hand hovering over controls he had operated thousands of times before. His yellow eyes remained fixed on the timer display as if staring at it long enough might make the numbers change to something that made sense in his understanding of military training and physical limitations. "System malfunction," declared Commander Thorne, the Academy's senior administrator, her crystalline features reflecting the harsh light of the monitoring screens. "Run full diagnostics on all tracking systems immediately. Check for equipment tampering, unauthorized modifications, or external interference." The monitoring station erupted into activity as technicians from multiple species worked frantically to find explanations for what they had witnessed. Advanced scanning systems that could detect molecular-level changes in equipment found no evidence of tampering. Quantum-level security protocols that tracked every movement within the course showed continuous monitoring with no gaps or anomalies. Psychological evaluation sensors that measured stress levels and decision-making patterns indicated normal human baseline readings throughout the entire course. Marcus sat in a holding area, confused by the commotion his completion had caused. Academy security personnel had escorted him to an isolated room immediately after he crossed the finish line. Through the transparent walls, he could see officials running between different monitoring stations and arguing in languages his translator could not process quickly enough to follow. "Cadet Webb," Commander Thorne entered the room accompanied by 3 other senior officials and Drill Sergeant Krex. "You will submit to complete physical and mental evaluation to determine how you achieve this impossible performance." The next 3 hours involved the most thorough examination Marcus had ever experienced. Medical scanners analyzed his cellular structure, brain activity, muscle composition, and genetic markers. Psychological evaluation programs tested his memory, reasoning capabilities, stress responses, and decision-making processes. Security systems examined every piece of equipment he had used during the course and every second of recorded footage from multiple angles and sensor types. No performance-enhancing substances, reported the chief medical officer. A being whose multiple arms allowed her to operate several diagnostic devices simultaneously. No genetic modifications or cybernetic implants. No evidence of external assistance or communication. Standard human physiology within normal parameters for his species. No equipment violations, announced the security chief after reviewing hours of sensor data. Standard Academy gear used within normal operating parameters. No unauthorized modifications or hidden technology. All tracking systems functioned correctly throughout the entire course. No psychological anomalies, concluded the Academy's head of cadet evaluation. Normal stress responses, standard decision-making patterns for human cognitive processes. No evidence of artificial intelligence assistance or programmed responses. Commander Thorne studied the reports with growing frustration. Every possible explanation for cheating or system manipulation had been eliminated, yet the performance remained impossible according to everything the Academy understood about military training and physical limitations. "Explain your methods," she demanded, turning to Marcus with an expression that mixed suspicion with genuine curiosity. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled officials, noting their obvious confusion and tension. "I looked for the most efficient path through each section," he said simply. "I used what was available and adapted to the conditions as they changed." The ravine crossing, Drill Sergeant Krex spoke for the first time since the examination began. "How did you identify the structural weakness in the cliff face?" "The rock looked different in that area," Marcus replied. "The color was slightly off and there were visible cracks running through it. When something looks unstable, it probably is unstable." "The radiation zone," continued Krex. "How did you know the metallic debris could be used to channel energy?" "Metal conducts electricity, and radiation works similarly in some ways," Marcus explained. "If you have an energy source and conductive materials, you can usually build something useful with them." "The zero-gravity navigation," pressed Commander Thorne. "How did you map the air current patterns?" "I watched how small objects moved when I released them," Marcus said. "Air currents carry things in predictable directions. If you understand the pattern, you can use it instead of fighting against it." The officials exchanged glances that conveyed confusion and disbelief. Marcus's explanations were logical but simplistic. He was describing approaches that seemed obvious to him but had never occurred to military instructors with decades of experience training warriors from across the galaxy. "These methods are not part of any established military doctrine," stated the Academy's chief of strategic training. "No species in our records has ever approached tactical challenges using these techniques." "Why would you assume the course could be completed in under an hour?" asked Commander Thorne. "The design specifications clearly indicate a minimum time requirement of 12 hours for even the most capable individuals." Marcus considered the question carefully. The course seemed like it was designed to test specific abilities, but every challenge had multiple possible solutions. "I just looked for the ones that worked best with what I had available." "You treated military challenges like puzzles to be solved rather than obstacles to be overcome," observed Drill Sergeant Krex, and Marcus could detect something like wonder in the massive alien's voice. "Is there a difference?" Marcus asked genuinely. The question hung in the air, as the assembled officials realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. This human had not just completed their ultimate training course in impossible time. He had revealed that their fundamental understanding of military challenges might be limited by the assumptions and traditions of their own species. For thousands of years, galactic civilizations had refined their approaches to warfare based on their natural abilities and environmental conditions. Each species had developed sophisticated military doctrines that maximized their inherent strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. The Academy's training courses were designed to test how well individuals could apply these established methods under pressure, but humans had no ancient military traditions in galactic warfare. They had no species-specific advantages that had been refined over millennia. Instead, they possessed something that more advanced civilizations had apparently lost through specialization: the ability to see problems as opportunities and to find novel solutions using whatever resources were available. 6 months after Marcus's impossible completion of the Crucible, the Galactic Military Academy looked very different. Construction crews were rebuilding entire sections of the training complex, while instructors from dozens of worlds worked together to redesign curricula that had remained unchanged for centuries. The revolution in military thinking had begun with one human cadet, but its effects were spreading throughout the galaxy. Drill Sergeant Krex stood in the newly configured tactical training center, watching a mixed group of cadets attempt a problem-solving exercise that would have been unthinkable before Marcus's demonstration. Instead of species-segregated training that emphasized traditional strengths, cadets now worked in integrated teams where different approaches were encouraged and rewarded. The key is not to overcome the obstacle, Krex explained to a group of new instructors, his words carrying an authority earned through months of studying human tactical methods. The key is to understand what the obstacle is trying to teach you and find the lesson that requires the least effort to learn. The changes had not been easy to implement. Many senior officials had resisted the idea that thousands of years of military doctrine could be improved by studying the methods of a species barely a century removed from primitive warfare, but the results were undeniable. Cadets trained in the new methods showed remarkable improvements in adaptability, resource efficiency, and creative problem-solving under pressure. Marcus had become the Academy's most requested instructor, though he spent much of his time confused by the attention his training methods received. What seemed like obvious approaches to him required careful explanation and practice for cadets whose species had evolved more specialized thinking patterns. The important thing is to see what is actually there instead of what you expect to be there, Marcus explained to a class of advanced tactical students. Every situation contains resources and opportunities that may not be obvious at first. Your job is to find them and figure out how to use them. A Thraxian cadet raised one of her 4 arms in question. But how do you know which unusual approaches will work and which will fail? You try them and see what happens, Marcus replied. Simply, if something does not work, you try something else. The cost of small failures is usually much less than the cost of avoiding all risks. The academic study of human tactical thinking had become a major field of research throughout the galaxy. Universities offered courses in applied human problem-solving and adaptive resource utilization. Military historians were re-examining famous battles and campaigns to identify instances where human-style approaches might have achieved better results with fewer resources. Commander Thorne had initially opposed the changes but eventually became one of their strongest advocates after witnessing the improved performance of cadets trained in the new methods. We spent so long perfecting our existing abilities that we forgot how to develop new ones, she admitted during a conference of military educators from across the galaxy, the story of the human who completed the impossible course in 57 minutes had become legend among galactic military forces. But more important than the record itself was what it represented: proof that superior technology and inherited advantages were not the only paths to military excellence. New training facilities were being constructed on dozens of worlds, all incorporating design principles learned from analyzing Marcus's approach to the original Crucible. Instead of courses that tested predetermined abilities, the new facilities presented open-ended challenges that could be solved through multiple approaches and encouraged cadets to find novel solutions rather than apply standard techniques. The changes extended beyond military training. Civilian sectors began adopting human-style problem-solving methods for engineering challenges, resource management, and crisis response. What had started as a revolution in military education was becoming a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization approached complex problems. Marcus often walked through the Academy's memorial garden, where a small plaque had been placed near a fountain that incorporated water flow patterns, similar to those he had used in the underwater sections of the original course. The inscription was simple: "In memory of conventional thinking, may it rest in peace." But the memorial was not really about the death of old ideas. It was about the birth of new possibilities that emerged when different perspectives were allowed to interact and influence each other. The galaxy had discovered that diversity of thought was as valuable as diversity of species, and that the newest members of the galactic community might have important contributions to make to its oldest institutions. Drill Sergeant Krex retired from active training duty, but remained at the Academy as an advisor for curriculum development. He spent his days working with human instructors to develop new challenges that would test adaptability and creative thinking rather than just physical capability and doctrinal knowledge. The humans showed us that we had been asking the wrong questions, Krex explained to a group of visiting military officials from a distant sector. We were testing whether cadets could overcome obstacles using their existing abilities. We should have been testing whether they could find new abilities when their existing ones were insufficient. The Academy's graduation ceremonies now included a new tradition. Instead of demonstrating mastery of established techniques, graduating, cadets were required to present an original solution to a novel problem using only basic resources. The exercise was known as the Marcus Test, and had become the most respected achievement in galactic military education. Years later, when historians studied the transformation of military thinking that occurred during this period, they would identify Marcus's completion of the Crucible as a turning point not just in tactical training but in the galaxy's understanding of intelligence itself. The discovery that humans possessed unique cognitive abilities had led to broader research into the mental capabilities of all species and the recognition that every world in the galactic community might contribute distinct perspectives to common challenges. Marcus never broke his own record of 57 minutes and 43 seconds, but that was never the point. The record had served its purpose by proving that impossible achievements became possible when someone was willing to see familiar problems in completely new ways. The real victory was not in completing the course quickly, but in teaching the galaxy that there was always more than one way to reach any destination worth reaching.